Hello and welcome to the Adventurers Club of Los Angeles. My name is Andrew McGregor. I have the prodigious privilege of serving as first vice president this year. We are an organization that for the past 100 plus years has met almost every Thursday to share, discuss, and disseminate stories of adventure, how-to guides of adventure, and general joy of adventure and adventureness. I am completely honored and enthralled to invite to the stage and be blessed by being with on the stage Dr. David Warburton of the Order of British Empire and many, many other titles. In fact, there's a cavalcade of titles I encourage you to look up online. Dr. Warburton, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction, and very nice to see you and the membership. Yeah, and so we're here to talk about adventures in Mongolia. Correct?
Indeed we are, sir. Yeah, there's so many entry points to this story, but let's just start with kind of like the broader geographic and historical. How did you come to the country, and when was that? And
well, Mongolia is, I'll just show you.
There's the map on the screen as well, right there.
On the screen.
Yeah, yeah.
One up here as well. It's more fun with this one.
Ah.
So this is Mongolia. It's a huge country. It stretches right across the top of China, and I always tell the Mongolians that they are China's hat and Russia's underwear. So Siberia goes even further across the top there, and they think that's very funny, actually. And it's true. So we've been going there, Larry, we were discussing, this is my colleague Larry Ross.
Could you look at me for the interwebs and then?
Oh, you're not very pretty, Andrew.
But sir, I can only be what I am.
Yeah, so we've been going there for 25, something like that, years. And the original impetus was that Mongolia was the first member of the Comintern. In 1922, Sukhbatar went to Moscow and got the Red Army to come and bail out the Mongolians who were on the short end of the stick with the White Russians. And so they drove out the White Russians and then joined the Comintern. And that persisted until 91, when the Soviet Empire collapsed and the Mongolians chose democracy.
And so what is the Comintern as opposed to the Soviet Union in terms of this historical narrative?
Okay, the Comintern is the Communist International, about which we sing in the red flag.
Indeed,
right?
we do.
And so Mongolia was the first independent country to join the communist orbit. And they had a communist government up until 1991. When the Russians left, taking their money with them, the economy collapsed, the health system collapsed, and we were invited to go there by a chap called Arnold Springer, who was a professor of Russian history at, was it Cal State Long Beach, was it?
Yeah.
Yes, and he went there and fell in love with the place. He was actually taking a trip through Russia to observe the dissolution of communism, and took a wrong turning on the Trans-Siberian Railroad and ended up in Mongolia. And so he fell in love with it. He invited us to come. We likewise fell in love with the place, and it's been going on ever since. So we've been able to help them transform their healthcare system into a fairly modern healthcare system, converting it from the Russian system, which is very different. And so we're focused particularly on women and children and childbirth and child health and this kind of thing.
Yeah, and can you briefly share a bit of your biography in terms of the medical field, and just to give an overview of?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm British. Obviously, you can tell by my cultured accent.
Speech impediment.
My cultured accent.
Yes.
And I was born in London and educated there at St Thomas's Hospital. Founded in before 1300 and since abolished. But anyway, I digress. So I trained in London, did about 3 or 4 years in the National Health Service, and then was invited to Harvard, spent a year there at the Children's Hospital, got interest in newborn medicine, spent a couple of years in Providence, Rhode Island. Then it was the 100-year snow in Providence, and I got recruited out here on a day like today. Where do I sign? This will do very nicely, thank you. Sunshine and palm trees. And I've been at Children's Hospital Los Angeles now for well over 40 years. And it's been a wonderful ride. And so that's my background. I'm a physician scientist. I like to say I'm a baby doctor who grew up to be a scientist. And so that's what I do. And global health is only one of the things I do. At the moment, I'm heading a large program on COVID, long COVID in kids. And that's our current area of interest. And actually, we've done quite a bit with COVID in Mongolia. They did very well with COVID at the beginning because they have this very long border with China, and they closed that early on and didn't get any COVID. But then a truck driver came back from Russia, went to a mass spreader event, it was a rock concert or something, and then the genie was out of the bottle and they had COVID. So it's been a challenge since then.
How are those stories disseminated that it was that one guy coming back from the bar? Like how does that get, what's the mechanism that becomes medical knowledge?
Well, they have a very well-developed public health system in Mongolia, which dates back to the Russian period. And if you go to visit one of the small towns, visit their little clinic, they have a map on the wall, and they have pins in the map. And this is where all the nomadic people, that they live in gers, and the gers are on the map. And under the ger, there are other coloured pins. There's grey ones for the elderly people. There's pink ones for the pregnant ones, and so on. And so they know where everybody is and what's wrong with them. So they did case tracing, as we've taught them, and they found what had happened.
And a gur is kind of their yurt or TB. How would you describe a gur?
Yeah, gur is, in Russian, it's a yurt.
Yep.
In Mongolian, it's gur. Mongolian is a Turkic language, so it's all very forward in the mouth and a lot of spitting. I'm not very good in Mongolian, actually, but they understand English, a lot of them. The older people mostly speak Russian because they were under the Comintern for many years. The younger people mostly speak English as their second language, although it's common for Mongolians to speak 5 or 7 languages fluently. They're also highly educated people, particularly the women. Over 70% of Mongolian women have a post-high school diploma of some kind, a degree or something. So the men tend to leave school at a younger age because they go into agriculture and herding. So when you go visit a family out on the steppe, you'll find that the dad left school at 16 or 14 to apprentice with his uncle or something, and the woman has a degree in mathematics from the National University.
Did that stem from the Soviet era, or was that a post-92 evolution in the country?
Yeah, it's very much like Monty Python, you know, what did the Romans do for us lately? You know, that sketch. So what did the Russians do for us lately? Well, they brought education, they brought, you know, organized government, police force, army, and all that stuff. And the older Mongolians wish the Russians had never left. The younger Mongolians are very happy to be democratic. So it's very interesting.
And then
and the Mongolian army had a very distinguished record in World War II, or the Great Patriotic War. They actually attacked Berlin from the west. Yeah.
So was that like a revival of Khan in the internal cultural mythology?
Yes, very much so. Well, and in fact, Chingus Khan, the mythology of Chingus Khan, has been revived since '91 and is now revered. Under the Soviet system, Chingus was somewhat repressed and you weren't allowed to say the name and everything. Now it's very popular, and someone has built a huge statue of Chingus Khan outside Ulaanbaatar, which is now a tourist attraction. Yeah.
So is he kind of like how do you describe him, as a George Washington character, or what is...
Well, except that he was about 400 years before George Washington.
But like in terms of like a founding...
Yes, he's a founding person. He was the first person to get the Mongolians to collaborate. So collaboration is not a natural thing for Mongolians, but Chingus was able to pull it off and get all these tribes to collaborate. And he and his sons and his grandsons had the largest contiguous land-based empire ever. It actually stretched from Japan all the way to Vienna. And he could get a message from one side of the empire to the other in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's one of the things I always found fascinating about that history is that these lethal marauders were good at building a bureaucracy. And I don't know where that kind of wisdom came from, but...
Well, Chingus was a very intelligent fellow and also very tolerant. He tolerated all religions and had no particular preference over one religion or another. He particularly liked Christians because he thought Jesus was very clever doing that coming alive again trick,
Right.
which was a very, in shamanic culture, that's the ultimate trick. So he thought that was cool, and when he conquered us, I mean he would come up with his army to a city, and display the white banner. If the city surrendered, he would forgive them, and he would take talented people, bring them to his court in Karakoram. If they didn't surrender, he'd exhibit the black banner, and then he would take the city. And then he would slaughter all the useless people and just take the talented ones back to Karakoram. And any men of military service would be, military age would be absorbed into his army.
And do you find that spirit in Mongolia today at all? Or like tolerance, but I'll kill you if you don't let me tolerate you? Or...
Well, I think current day Mongolians are democratic and peaceful. But I wouldn't kick the beehive. There's only 3 million of them, you know, in this vast country. In fact, it's one of the least populated countries in the world. About half of them live in the capital city, Ulaanbaatar, which is a big change. When Larry and I first went there, Ulaanbaatar had a population of about 250,000, and you had to have an internal passport to go to the city and get permission from the local commissar. You know, now it's freedom of movement, property rights, and all this kind of things you didn't have under communism. So the population of the city is now 1.5 million. So it's a huge increase. And that's one of their biggest challenges, is the rapid urbanization. So under communism, if you were a herder, the herd belonged to the government, and you were a paid custodian of the herd. Under capitalism, the herd belongs to the bank. So if you have a severe winter, under communism, you really didn't care because you still got paid. Under capitalism, the bank forecloses because half your herd is dead, and now you're stuck and you've got to go move to the capital city. So that's one of the differences.
So it's kind of debt as a cultural imperialism, would you say? Or is it
Debt?
just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that it's cultural imperialism. It's a fact of capitalism.
Right. But
That's how it works, right? I mean, Adam Smith said the value of money is having the use of it, right? And if you need to have the use of it, you have to rent it because there's interest. People have interest in what you're doing, right? That's what it means. They're interested in what you do. But it costs money. Yeah.
So you arrive in 92 with a brilliant population of marauders and mathematicians, and you're like, I like that. What of all the countries in the world, why did this one kind of speak to your soul, so to speak?
Well, that's very interesting. So I went there I'd been to China before, but I had really no preconceptions about Mongolia. When I got there, I was hooked by the folk culture and the music. That's what really did it for me. They have a folk theatre. Well, actually, there's 2 or 3 folk theatres in Ulaanbaatar. And I went and listened to the folk concert, and this music spoke to my Celtic soul. Yeah, there were many figures in the music which are the same in Scottish music. And we got to meet the people who were making the music and understand what they were thinking about, and the dancing is incredible. And I got hooked on that aspect of the culture. Lenin said, culture is for everyone. And wherever you go, I mean, you may have heard recently in Mariupol in the Ukraine, one of the things the Russian did was shell the opera house, right? That was important because Lenin said culture is for everyone, and everywhere the Russians went, they built an opera house. In any city of any size, there is an opera house in the former Soviet Comintern thing. And so they have one. They have a beautiful opera house in Ulaanbaatar, and every Saturday they put on an opera and a ballet. and it's world class. So you can go and see Swan Lake on Saturday, and on Sunday you can see Turandot, for $4 or $5. So it's an incredible place to visit.
Have you seen the throat singing in the opera house, or is that divided?
Pardon?
Is the kind of throat singing ever done in the opera house?
Well, there are 2 or 3 operas that are Mongolian operas that are written by Mongolians, and they have throat singing in them.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they're all about Chinggis Khan, and it's all about how Chinggis meets Borte, and then Borte is abducted, and he goes to find her, and they're reconciled, and then the final act is throat singing, where they're celebrating the harvest or something. Yeah, but throat singing is in the folk theatres. There is there's a folk theatre of equal size to the opera house right across the square, which is incredible, and that's where they do that. Yeah.
Is there one language in Mongolia, or is there like a northern southern dialect, or is there like an ancient Mongolian that's used in the opera?
Well, Kalk Mongolian is the main language. That's spoken by like 85% of the people there. It's a Turkic language. There's a lot of spitting in front of the mouth noises. It's very difficult to learn. For an English person, it's difficult to learn because you can't guess what the words mean unless they are. I mean, I read Cyrillic because I can read Russian, but even if you can sound the words out, they don't always mean what you think they mean, unless they're transliterated words from English or French or Russian. Yeah. So, sorry, I forgot the rest of the question. What's the train of thought there?
Is there an ancient Mongolian that's used in the opera?
Mongolian. Well, I mean, originally at the time of Chinggis Khan, there were all these dialects and different things, yeah, but they sort of boiled down into Mongolian. There's also, the next door country is Kazakhstan, that other huge country there, where Baikonur is, where we shoot the rockets to the space station, right? So there are Kazakhs who live in the western part of Mongolia. They speak Kazakh. And there are Kazakhs who live in a suburb of Ulaanbaatar. And the Kazakhs are Islamic people. They are of Mongolian origin, but they're different. So they speak their language. Yeah. But Mongolian is the lingua franca. And then, of course, the intelligentsia speak either Russian or English.
Okay.
Or Chinese sometimes. Or one of the other Eastern Bloc languages. So one of my great friends there, Ayun, she was foreign minister and minister of the environment twice, and a real intelligent, wonderful person. She was educated in Czechoslovakia during the Russian period. So she speaks Czech and English and blah, blah, blah. And she was also the first Mongolian to graduate with a PhD from Cambridge. Yeah, which is an interesting story. When she was a young woman, she got her undergraduate degree in the Czech Republic. And there used to be a train that went from Ulaanbaatar to Moscow, 1st of September, full of students. And in Moscow, they'd then get off that train and then catch trains from Moscow to the other capitals of Eastern Europe. So they would be educated in Czech or Bulgarian or whatever it is, Polish, whatever. So she finished her undergraduate degree, and she went back to her headmaster and said, I want to learn English. I think I'd like to be a nanny in Britain. Would you please write me a letter of reference? So the headmaster said, you're not going to be a bloody nanny. Let's go see the British ambassador. You're going to Cambridge and you're going to get a PhD.
All right.
So she ended up getting a PhD in geosciences from Cambridge.
Fascinating. All right, so yeah, it's 92, and then how do you get plugged into high-level medical policy, and what was it like with that transition phase from the Soviet era into, I don't know, the modern Western
I
one?
think, in that kind of situation, the first thing you've got to do is gain people's respect, right? And so Larry and I went there and did education. So the first 5-10 years, it was giving lectures, trying to teach them how to take care of do a better job taking care of their patients, and then getting them to think about the business aspects of medicine and how you can fund it, And there are some very smart people there who took to this. There's a chap called Enctur, who was the Director General of the Mothers and Children's Hospital for many years. He rebuilt that place. The original building was the Russian garrison hospital, made of Soviet concrete and everything. The building is terrible, but he's fixed it, the inside, and so it's now a modern hospital. It took 20 years, but he did it. Yeah. So it's a matter of gaining respect, and it's important to go back, right? I mean, many people go on medical tourism. They go once, and then they disappear. But if you go back over 20 years, people begin to recognize you and to appreciate. So the Mongolians, on the whole, don't have much money. The GDP in Mongolia is about $4,000. So they give you medals instead. So that's what all this is.
Can we take a tour of your medals?
Sure. Well, this gong here, which is, I think, made of lead because it's very heavy, is an honorary professorship at their university medical school. This one is for, I think it's 60 years of pediatric surgery. And this one is for 80 years of obstetrics and gynecology or something like that. This one is the freedom of Ulaanbaatar, the capital city. It's the 800th anniversary of their capital city. This one is the presidential medallion of their medical school. I think they got a job lot of these back in the Soviet era because it's kind of red with, you know, gold and brilliance. This one is the Hero of the Order of Friendship of Mongolia. And I actually saw Putin giving this one out last week in Moscow to somebody. Originally it was a Soviet decoration.
Yeah.
And this one is the Order of the British Empire, which is a decoration from Her Majesty the Queen.
Would you like to briefly diverge into that story, or?
Whatever you want. So I went to the palace to get this gong, and the Queen was taking the day off because at the time she was like 85 or something, and so it was Princess Anne that gave out the decorations that day, and she said, you walk. The equerry gives you instructions of how to do this, and you march into the ballroom, and you make a left turn and approach the dais. Do not climb up on the dais. Stand with your toes against the dais. The royal personage will have conversation. Then they will pin the gong upon you. You have a hook on your chest for that, and then this is the most difficult part: 3 steps backward march across a Persian carpet, which is all rucked up from everybody. I'm a W, of course, so I was at the end of the queue. So everybody else has rucked it up for you. So yeah. So Princess Anne said, "Oh, Dr. Warburton, I hear you've been in America for a very long time." I said, "Yes, ma'am, it's been 30 years. It's been a life sentence." And she said, "Well, what on earth are you doing here?" So yes, it was like that. Anyway, very interesting day out. And of course, at Buckingham Palace, they don't give you anything to eat. You get Malvern water. That's what you get for refreshments.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that a tradition, or?
I think it's to stop people getting drunk, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's the person who made that
Yeah,
policy?
I was told to say that if ever I was asked why I got the OBE, I was to say that it was for drinking gin and tonic, but not too much at once. Yes.
Excelsior.
Yeah. So yes.
So I'm curious, when you were in that phase of transition, like for example, one of the progenitors of blood transfusion was a contemporary of Lenin, and he really believed in the brotherhood of man, and he actually died giving a blood transfusion. Were there ideological, and like medical practices that had an ideological embedment, if that makes sense, that were from this kind of socialist ideal that they either were a value or not a value?
Well, I think actually, I think the organization of the health system in Russia and the Comintern countries predated Lenin. I've seen pictures of the first Russian delegation to go to, medical delegation to go to Mongolia, which was in 18 something. Or maybe it was early 1900 because it was in a charabanc. It was in a car, right? It was like a big car, and there's all these people sitting in a car, and probably a third of them were women. So and the way the Russians organized their medicine was by systems. So you have a hospital for each system, right, Larry? I mean, basically you have the children and the mothers were in one hospital. Then you had the cancer hospital, the infectious disease hospital, the liver hospital, the heart hospital, the kidney hospital. So one of the things we had to do over the years was pry the children with cancer away from the adult cancer hospital and get them back in the children's hospital where they belong. Yeah. So I wouldn't say it was. I don't think it's to do with communist ideology. I think it's more to do with the way medicine was set up in the 19th century in Russia, and we probably have the Germans to thank for that. So Oh, and there's a picture on the screen. There's a picture there of Ulaanbaatar in the winter, and if you look at the middle of the picture, you can see the built-up area. That's where about half the people live in Khrushchev apartments, although now there are more modern ones, of course. And then the brown area surrounding it is where the gers are, and then the white area is the snow on the mountains.
Yeah, so let's kind of speak about your work there and some of the policies. I know you won't take complete credit for things, but how have things changed in Mongolia that wouldn't have changed had you never gone to that country?
That's a very interesting question. So I think what we've been able to do is empower the Mongolians to solve their own problems. So, when COVID came along, because they'd been properly trained in public health, they were able to deal with that. One of the things we've taken a big swing at is environmental science and environmental health in Mongolia. Because there are so many people living in these gers, each ger, there's like 250,000 gers, and each one burns about 4 tons of coal in 3 months to keep warm, because in that country it's 40 below in the winter. So they have the world's worst annual pollution during the winter months. The pollution level in Mongolia in Ulaanbaatar gets up to 1 gram of pollution per cubic meter of air.
How bad is that compared to LA's worst day, for example?
Right, well, LA's worst day used to be about 100 micrograms.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like completely off the scale. And we were able to teach them how to, collaborate with them on how to measure that, and then discover the impact of that on health. Solving it is a much harder problem. Yeah, but we've had a crack at that along with them.
And how's it going, and what's the success or failure of it? Or
Well, there was a move to replace all the cooking stoves. Bill Gates was very interested in that, and the World Bank spent a ton of money on that. Didn't really work. And then the next thing was clean coal. So it's very reminiscent of London in the 1950s. We tried all this. It's all been done in London and Pittsburgh. Right, these were the places where this was all pioneered. And so clean coal was the latest thing. That didn't really work either. Now, one of our colleagues whom I helped educate in Switzerland, he has built, and several other people have done this too, they've built these well-insulated modern homes that don't require electricity and don't require solid fuel, so they don't pollute, 0 emissions. Now, if we could do that 250,000 times over, we would have solved the problem. So we know what the solution is. They know what the solution is. The challenge is, in a country where the GDP is $4,000, building a bunch of $50,000 homes is a challenge.
Are you working on it?
Yes.
What are you doing?
Well, we're trying. Well, you know, we're trying to encourage them to do that. And the biggest challenge, I think, is the capital budget. But we did do a study where we looked at the impact of pollution on the GDP in Ulaanbaatar, and pollution sucks up 20% of GDP.
How do you quantify that? Because you don't have like an A/B study, right? Like, how does that?
Oh, well, you have this massive pollution during the winter, clean air during the summer, massive pollution during the winter. So what we did was compare absenteeism during the pollution period versus the summer, and then figured out what that absenteeism cost in terms of opportunity cost. And it's 20% of GDP.
Can you then leverage that data for like a World Bank loan as like the collateral loss, or does it work at that level?
It's a challenge. I mean, Mongolia is pretty well loaned out. I mean, they owe the Chinese a ton of money. They owe the World Bank a ton of money. So, the challenge with loans is they have to be paid, right?
And all this debt is new since 1992. All the debt they now owe to international entities is since 92.
Well, that's right. So you see, you know, the Chinese will come and they say, "Would you like a football stadium, or would you like a racing stadium, or would you like, you know, some public building?" And the government will say, "Yes, please, we'll have one of those." And the Chinese will say, "Well, okay, that'll be at 8%." And then they come and they build it. And they don't employ any local people. They bring all the employees, all the food, all the materials, everything. They build it, then they give them the key and say, "There you go." And now they're on the hook for an 8% mortgage for this multi-million-dollar, or renminbi, I should say, multi-million renminbi structure. And this is what they've done in Mongolia and all over Africa, and that whole belt and loop, or whatever it is there.
Belts and roads, I think.
Belt and road, or whatever it is, yeah.
Is that China's imperialist methodology, or is it just how they practice business?
They took a leaf out of the British Empire, didn't they?
All right, well then.
In fact, you know, I'm not supposed to say so, but actually Britain really owns Mongolia.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, so Mongolians' major industry is minerals. The biggest operator of mines in Mongolia is Rio Tinto, right? Rio Tinto is listed on the London Stock Exchange and the Sydney Stock Exchange. It was founded in 1600 and something to exploit mines in Portugal, right? That's why it's called Rio Tinto, because it was the Rio Tinto in Portugal. Tinto is red in Portugal, right? So it's full of these red minerals. So, you know, it's very interesting. America is interested in Mongolia because you see where it sits, right? It's a buffer state between China and Russia. It's democratic. The nearest democracy to that one is 1,000 miles away or more in Japan, right? It's the only two democracies in that part of the world except India, right? So the Americans have a huge embassy, a stick of Marines, a couple of hundred staff. The British, who actually control most of the economy, have an ambassador, an assistant, and a cat.
That's a wonderful premise of a novel. As is that tool in your hand. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh yes, my tool here. Yes. So this
what is that cat's name? Is my first question.
Yeah, please go on. So this is actually an eagle perch, which I purchased at the fair in Bayanulgi province. And so when you're riding your horse, if you want to carry your eagle is heavy. It's like carrying your Christmas turkey on your arm. So, you know, your arm gets tired very quickly. So what you do is you have this thing on your thigh like that. The eagle perches on here, put the eagle up here, and then you have this to tie the eagle's legs to the perch so it can't get away. And the eagle is hooded as well, so it won't fly off. And then you can ride your horse along. Yeah, I thought this was beautiful because of the carving in it. It's got this beautiful spiral. Yeah, so this is Kazakh Mongolian. This is, yeah.
And can you tell some of your eagle horse riding adventures and things like that?
Well, sure. I mean, we've been out to Bayanulgi province, and we were there doing medical work there. With I think they went home, but some of my young people were there. We were trying. They have a big problem there with maternal mortality and infection, and we were trying to help them sort that out. But we just happened to go at the time of year when it's the Eagle Festival. So I don't know if any of you have seen the movie The Eagle Huntress. It's about this young girl who, her father has no sons, so he trains his daughter to be the eagle hunter. And they go out and they catch the eagles. So the eagles are caught as chicks. They take the female eagles because they're trainable. The males are not trainable. So they hand rear the chick. The chick becomes bonded with their owner. And then they teach the eagle to hunt and return to the wrist, like falconry, basically, but with an eagle. Yeah. And so we got, the young woman's name is Isolfan, and we got to visit her and her family, have lunch with them, and watch her fly her eagles and all of that. Right now she's in medical school. She was offered a full ride at Harvard for undergraduate in medical school, but she declined it because she felt that it would be too hard and too far from her family, because they're Islamic people and they don't want their daughters going off too far. And so she's in Kazakhstan, at the medical school in Kazakhstan.
And so in terms of Mongolian culture, do all fathers teach their sons how to do this, or is it within this?
No, this is the Kazakh culture.
It's within the Kazakh culture,
Yeah,
within
eagle
the
hunting
Mongols.
is not really a Mongolian thing per se. If you see people with eagles there, they're Kazakhs. Yeah, Mongolians don't do that. There are three main sports in Mongolia called the three manly sports.
Yes.
Wrestling, archery, and what's the third one, Larry? Oh, right, horse racing, yeah. So horse racing is done with children. They 6 and 7 year old jockeys, and they ride for 30 miles on a cross-country horse race. And the big one is Nadam, which is their word for the annual national festival, which is in June or July or something. July 13th, isn't it? Nadam usually. So that's the one. Then they have archery, and I did actually bring...
Please, show us.
I did bring a bow and arrow to show you the accoutrements. And then the other one is, thank you, the other one is wrestling. And it's somewhat akin to sumo. And in fact, the champion sumos in Japan, a lot of them are Mongolians, really. And they learn their wrestling in Mongolia, and then they move to Japan and join a dojo. But this is a Mongolian compound bow, and this is the arrow that they use at Nadam in the competition. And so the point of this is that this was Chinggis Khan's big secret. So his mounted soldiers were able to kill the enemy before they got anywhere close. And they did it with a bow and arrow. And they still have competitions in Mongolia for horseback archery. But the big trick is that if you can get the bow behind you, you can shoot behind like this. So if you do it the way most people would do it, you do it with the two fingers like that, like you see in the cowboy and Indian pictures, right? If you want to get right behind, you have to turn your wrist like this, and then you can get right behind like that and shoot them. Yeah, so that's how they do it. So they're quite powerful, you know.
It's a boy. Something was harmed in the filming of this. So how does that bow differ?
Luckily, the deer didn't fall off the wall.
Luck, right? So how does that bow differ than the longbows used at Agincourt to defeat the French?
Well, the Agincourt bow was much longer, and it was made of, it wasn't a compound bow, and it was made of made of yew. And that one took years to learn to draw it because the draw was so strong. And people used to actually grow special bone spurs in their shoulders. And the Duke of Wellington thought that bows and arrows would be good in his army against Napoleon, and he actually took a squad of soldiers and tried to teach them to be archers because the powder wouldn't get wet and that kind of stuff. Of course, the bowstrings get wet. But it turns out that it takes 3 years to learn to be a longbowman and grow the bone spurs, and it takes 6 weeks to learn to be a musket infantryman. So that idea was dropped.
And so this is kind of like the Kalashnikov of that era.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. Beautiful thing, isn't it? And they were all bound. This has got nylon, but it was all bound with deer sinews and that kind of stuff.
And so I assume you've been out hunting with Mongolians or Cossacks?
Well, target shooting.
Target shooting, yeah.
Yeah. Haven't done any hunting.
But
they have special hats for that.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell us.
The prairie dogs over there are very common. Yeah, the little rodents that live in the ground. And they're very curious. And so they have these special hats for hunting these animals which have like spikes on them that wobble. And so the prairie dogs will look out of the burrow to see this hat, see what's going on with that, and then yeah. Yeah. It's called boo dog.
Boo dog?
And this is my mess kit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this knife is made from a bayonet, and it's used to kill your sheep. So what you do is you put the sheep on its back, stab it in the stomach with this, then stick your arm in and grab the aorta and rip the aorta so it bleeds internally, and nothing is wasted. Not like kosher, or where you have the blood on the floor. Yeah, it's not like that. And that's how you kill a sheep. And then, of course, if you want to eat your lunch, you have these right handy, no forks required. Yeah. And then the other thing I've got on here is the other thing that men carry is this, which is a fire starting kit. So it has a steel on here, and you carry your lint in here, and you strike it with your knife, make a spark, and you can start a fire. The women have something similar, except it's more like personal care items. So they'll carry a needle and thread in a beautiful silver case, and then they'll carry ear pick, get the wax out of your ears, things like that.
And so about your medical practice, you'll be going on horseback to different locations, and you use these implements
Well, one of my great friends over there who just died recently, Melchinku. You know Melchinku, right? He was like the dean of pediatrics in Mongolia, very famous, always on television, like Dr. Spock for Mongolians. He started out as a horseback general practitioner in the Gobi Desert. Yeah. And his daughter's a particular friend of mine, and she remembers as a girl going out on horseback with him doing his rounds. Yeah.
Does someone come to him and be like, hey, there's a sick person here, or does he kind of just check up on people as part of his rounds?
Well, as I said, in the clinic, in the little clinic, which is the Russian method, they know where everybody is. So they ride out to see the ones they need to see.
Okay.
The other reason the Russians did that, of course, was to know where everybody is so they could go and shoot them when they needed to.
That's one does.
There was a lot of that going on. Yeah, there was a lot of purging going on. But it's a great. In America, you probably couldn't do that because of HIPAA, right? You couldn't have somebody's house on a map with pins in it showing what's wrong with them that everybody could look at. That would be a violation of privacy, right? In Mongolia, there is very little privacy. So think about this: if you've got you're living in a round tent, right? Everybody's living in there, 3 generations. Privacy is not really a big thing for Mongolians.
Is there a deeper connection with that lack of privacy, or what's your sense of it?
Well, I mean,
we're family, we love each other, as opposed to get out of my bedroom, you bratty sister. Like, you know.
Yeah, people don't have their own rooms. Even in apartments, they tend not to. Well, of course, things have changed. I mean, now the people are more educated, they have more money, they have their own apartment. Yeah. But originally, everybody was in the same ger. And you did that because it was 40 below out, and if you didn't, you'd all freeze.
When I was in Kazakhstan, there was a great pride in the sacrifices for World War II, but there was also kind of a sense of Russian colonization. I would argue in Kazakhstan it was similar to kind of white America's treatment of Native Americans here, like munitions get launched from Kazakhstan, a lot of waste goes there, and then a lot of the killings that you mentioned earlier. Was that the Mongolian experience as well, or was it a different?
Oh, I think that's fairly similar across the Comintern, across the Soviet Empire. Yeah, there was a lot of exploitation. There is a museum in Ulaanbaatar which is to the disappeared, and the first thing the Russians did was kill 60,000 monks. They obliterated Buddhism in the first year. Yeah. But what have the Russians done for us lately, right? So, as we were saying, law, education, the army, blah, blah, blah. So, there's 2 sides to that.
Yeah. And so where do you see the country going 20 years hence?
Well, I think if Putin doesn't decide he wants it back, and China doesn't decide they want the mines, or that they've already bought them at 8%, because when you default on your loans, they take something, right? I think that in 25 years, I think the country could be a little Switzerland type place in the middle of Northeast Asia, because it's democratic, it's relatively free, and you can do stuff there. There is corruption, of course, but it's not as bad as many places, and they have a strong sense of entrepreneurship.
Do you see any of the modern rises of autocracy, like we had in Hungary, Venezuela, debatably America with Trump, with their democratic processes, or are they kind of immune to it culturally?
Well, I think it's there are a lot of political parties. It is an open democratic system. Of course, there are problems, but it's a unicameral legislature called the Kurultai. Same word that Chingus Khan used, Kurultai. There are about 8 or 9 different political parties. The big ones are the former Communist Party, which is called something else, and then there is the Democratic Party. So those are the 2 big ones, but there's a Women's Party, a Greens Party, and so on.
So kind of like a Western European.
Yeah, it's based on a sort of parliamentary system in that there is a prime minister who runs the government in the Kurultai, sits in the Kurultai, and then there is a president instead of a king. There is a president, but he's also elected.
And were you there for the formulation of the Constitution? Like, why did they choose this system?
Well, I think they looked around at various systems, and they had studied America, they'd studied Britain, they'd studied various European countries. They knew what they didn't want, which was communism, and they wanted free elections.
And who was making those decisions after the Russians left?
Well, that's another interesting tale. At first, the Communist Party tried to hold on to power, but the economy collapsed. Everything was going to hell in a handbasket, and so the ground was fertile for a democratic revolution. It could have gone the other way. There was only 1 person killed in that revolution. His name was Zorichbata, and he was the sister of my friend Ayun.
Really?
Yeah. And
do you want to share his story, or do you want to share his story, or?
Well, he was a an advanced democratic thinker, and he was kind of got his neck out in front and got chopped. And she was actually invited. Well, she went back for the funeral, and then she was invited to take his seat in the Kurultai in a by-election. And it was a safe seat because they're Buryat Mongols, and so she got elected. And then she sat in the Kurultai for 18 years after that.
So Mongolia is the Switzerland of the future.
They would like to think so. They've said that. It's not something I've dreamt up. It's something they say. I think their economy is too small, really. I mean, 3 million people, 3 million times $4,000 is not that much money. And this is a problem all over Africa and other places in the world. You know, I once tried to help get the oil industry going in the Congo, the French Congo, but you know, when we went to try and raise money at the banks to build infrastructure, the sovereign note is not worth the paper it's printed on. So that's a big problem with emerging countries, is getting enough wealth to be able to borrow more, to leverage it properly.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I'd like to open up to the audience, unless you have a final comment on your time and tenure. And
well, I'd just like to invite everybody to come to Mongolia and sample it. It's a wonderful place, and you know.
What's the easiest way to get there? Is there a direct Bator?
Well, I think, well, you can fly through Seoul or Tokyo or Beijing, change planes, or you can go the other way via Moscow. And Turkish Airlines also have flights there now.
All right. So LAX to
LAX to wherever.
Narita, and then Narita. And
yeah.
Cool.
That's very pleasant because you can spend a day in Narita, actually, when you change planes.
Warburton, could you opine on the status of women in Mongolia and why does it appear to be so different from other countries?
The status of women in Mongolia is, I wouldn't say it's completely equal with men, but it certainly educationally it's superior to men. There are more professional women than there are professional men. I think it's to do with the value that culture places on education, particularly for women.
It almost seemed like masculinity and physical ruggedness were values, and then women were.
Well, so yes, so you know, most of the prime minister is a man, the president is a man. They have been women in the cabinet, but they don't get defence, and they don't get the exchequer. They get environmental science or public health or something like that, but they're there. And I mean, I think I was very surprised about how powerful women are in Mongolia, but it's better than many places in the world, including the USA, actually, from that respect.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you have a lot of experience with the folk medicines?
Yes, Tibetan folk medicine is very prevalent in Mongolia. It's practiced, and also Chinese, to a much lesser extent, Chinese traditional medicine. It is used when Western medicine fails. So I'm actually writing a grant about this at the moment, which is liver cancer is a big problem in Mongolia. And it's because of the hepatitis and because of alcohol and other stuff that's in the environment. And so when you run out of Western medical options, they tend to go with herbal remedies as palliative remedies. But people do drink the most amazingly nasty tonics that are made out of roots and vegetables and things.
David, from one who's been there with you many times, that was an incredible presentation, and I really loved it.
Bayatla.
One of the things that you might share is their love for cow's milk. I'm sorry, for mare's milk. And various concomitant.
So when you go to the supermarket, in Mongolia, there's 19 different varieties of milk. And there'll be cow's milk, and it's the good stuff. It's like 70% cream or something. And there'll be camel's milk, horse milk, yak milk, goat's milk, and various combinations thereof. And the national drink is a drink called irag. So irag is made in the gur. You hang a big leather bag on the inside of the gur, and you fill that with milk. And then the flies come and crap in it, and it starts to ferment. And eventually it gets alcoholic enough that the bacteria die, and so it's safe to drink. And then you drink this stuff, and it's like milk. It's like milk beer. And then you take the irag and you distill that, and now you've got milk vodka, right? Vodka, and it tastes milky because it still has milk proteins in it.
Least thing to make you go to the plains in Mongolia.
Beg pardon?
Least thing to make you run to the planks in Mongolia.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, you have to watch out. Mongolians say irag. Yeah, when they're telling you to be careful of how much you drink of it.
Yeah.
One other comment that I would add, as a public health point of view, about 100% of moms nurse their babies.
Yes.
And that is such an important component of their public
It-
health prevention.
It's a cultural norm in Mongolia to nurse your infant.
We have a shortage down in America, right?
Yeah, well,
So yeah, why is that?
Why is that?
Medically, yeah.
Well, first of all, Nestle hasn't got a foothold in Mongolia,
Okay.
and that is because the Mongolian government don't want them. And the other thing is, to be a real woman in Mongolia, you nurse your infant. It's an expected norm. And when you go to the maternity hospital, it's a community activity. Remember, this is a country that doesn't have hang-ups about privacy. So they're all sitting there, you know, tits out. Everybody's there. They're all nursing their babies, and they do it together. And there's a lactation coach or a midwife or something helping them. And even in the premature nursery, they're doing this. So it's really a norm. Yeah.
So can you get the antibodies from Similac that you get from mother's milk?
Of course not. Cow's milk is good for cows, and human milk is good for humans, okay? And you can get cow antibodies from Similac, except it's been boiled to shit, right? But human milk is the best thing for babies. And it is exactly the right nutritional composition, very different from cow's milk. Does not contain nasty antigens, and as Dr. Peer will tell you, it transmits antibodies, not just in the colostrum, but in regular milk. And so this is what we should be doing. We had the Victorians to thank for not doing this, right? In Mongolia, that never happened. And so breastfeeding is the norm. And if you can't do it, somebody else will do it for you.
So there's wet nursing.
Yeah.
So that Mongolian tourism question. China built the high-altitude train to Tibet, which has sent a lot of people there, and it's being criticized for this influx of tourists who are destroying the local ecology, pumping the economy, but McDonaldizing Tibet. Is there a similar danger for Mongolia, or is it remote enough?
Well, it's a very long train ride from China. There has been a train there for years. I mean, the Trans-Siberian Railroad runs through southern Siberia, and in Ulan-Ude, there is a branch line that goes down to Ulaanbaatar, and then south through the Gobi Desert to Hohhot on the Chinese northern border, and then on to Beijing. So you can go from Beijing to Moscow through Mongolia. I mean, I've done some of that route. I've done Irkutsk to Ulaanbaatar. It's something that you should do. I mean, it's something, I'm not sure I'd recommend it. It's a great tourist activity. It's long, and if you like trees, there's a lot of trees to look at.
Wow.
But yeah, it is interesting though to go on it.
We can put it on our Adventures Club list.
Yeah.
So, another question.
We can do one or two more questions, and then we need to
Yeah,
conclude.
it's,
and-
uh,
yeah.
Do you have an opinion on the
Always.
discoveries
Pardon?
in genomics and genetics? That Chingus Khan was the forefather of a huge portion of the world's population.
Yep.
And I could figure that out from biology, but are there other answers?
Well, you've heard of the Mongolian blue spot, right?
No.
No? You haven't.
Long age?
No, the Mongolian blue spot is a blue nevus that's found on the back of people of Mongolian descent, and it's found in China, Mongolia, and it's related to Chinggis Khan. And in fact, there is a restaurant in London where you can do a cheek swab and get a free meal if you're related to Chinggis Khan.
Huh.
Yeah. So, his MO was that he would conquer a city and then inseminate as many women as possible. Because
Not just his people, but him personally?
him personally, yeah. And the reason was that in the Mongolian culture, that relationship between father and son, no matter who the mother is really important. And all his generals were his sons. Yeah. And in fact, interestingly, so Borte, his wife, whom he married, he found her when she was 14, he married her when she was about 16, and then she was abducted. And she was impregnated by her abductor, and Chinggis Khan went and slew this guy and got Borte back. And she was already pregnant by this other chap, and that boy was called Jochi, which in Mongolian means visitor. Yeah, and then they went on to have other family, some of the Ogadai and so forth. Yeah. So, yeah, and the Mongolians understand outbreeding as well because of animal husbandry. They know that inbreeding is bad, and so in Mongolian culture, in the old days, you were supposed to find your bride at least 4 districts away to try and avoid inbreeding. Of course, Chinggis didn't do that. He found Borte in the next village.
If there are no other questions, I'll take the last history wonk.
All right.
I understand in 1971, the Soviet Union and China almost came to blows, and Mongolia would have been ground zero for that battleground. In the history books, it's the World War III that almost happened, and it would have gone nuclear almost immediately because all China had was people and all Russia had is technology. Do you any familiarity with that?
Well, World War II started in Mongolia at the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, which is where the Japanese were advancing through Manchuria. They got as far as Khalkhin Gol in Mongolia, and Zhukov, with a Russian brigade and the Mongolian army, beat the Japanese at Khalkhin Gol using coordinated attacks with tanks and airplanes. That's where he practiced it. That whole Japanese division was destroyed and captured.
This is early 1930s?
This was 1939, 38. And yes, and so at Khalkhin Gol, that was a decisive Russian-Mongolian victory, stopped Japanese expansion, showed that the Japanese army was deeply flawed in their organization. Bushido was bullshito, basically. And then Zhukov was then sent back to take on the Germans using the same techniques, and that's how he was able to beat Hitler, with the Mongolians at his side. So in Ulaanbaatar, there's a very interesting military monument, which is, they have one in Kiev as well. It's a tank, a Tu-84, whatever it is, on a plinth, painted Russian green, and on the side of the plinth is a map that shows you where that tank regiment went. And the Mongolians attacked Berlin from the west. you didn't want to piss off the Mongolians. So I think although there's not many of them, you don't want to mess with these people. And their presidential guard is a very crack ceremonial unit.
Well, thank you. And on that note, what's one song we should all go listen to tonight from Mongolia, or the song that kind of captured your spirit?
Oh. Well, I think actually, if you Google the Buryat State Theatre, you'll find some very interesting things on there. So yeah.
Cool. Well, all right. Thank you all. Oh yeah. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Like, subscribe, share, and go check out the Buryat Theater, and please share that as well. And go to Mongolia if you can. Thank you all again for joining.